If you've ever felt that words can cut deeper than any knife, this story will touch your soul. Stay until the end, because what you'll discover will change your perspective forever. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that make you reflect on what truly matters. My name is Michael Harrison. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew my family. We live in a modest 2-story house in suburban Chicago, where the smell of my mother-in-law's homemade apple pie used to mix with the sound of neighborhood kids playing in the street. It all started on a cold October afternoon, when the autumn leaves were painting the sidewalks gold and red. My wife Sarah and I had come to her mother's house for our traditional Sunday dinner. It was a sacred ritual in our family. Every Sunday, without fail, we'd gather around her old oak dining table to share pot roast, mashed potatoes, and endless stories from my in-laws. Sarah had been married to me for 3 years, and from day one, my relationship with her mother had been complicated. Mrs. Dorothy was 67 years old, had advanced diabetes, and lately had begun showing concerning signs of deterioration. Her hands would shake when she served coffee, she'd forget grandchildren's names, and there were days when she seemed lost in her own thoughts. That Sunday, while we waited for my brother-in-law Robert and sister-in-law Carol to arrive, Mrs. Dorothy accidentally spilled gravy all over my white dress shirt. It was an expensive shirt, recently bought, and the brown stain spread like a wound across the fabric. "Mrs. Dorothy, please be careful," I exploded, not measuring my words. "You can't even serve a meal without making a mess anymore." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Sarah stared at me with wide eyes, as if she didn't recognize me. Mrs. Dorothy, with her eyes growing moist, began to tremble in a way that had nothing to do with her illness. "Michael," my wife whispered, but I was furious. Tired of the Sunday dinners, tired of pretending everything was fine when clearly Mrs. Dorothy needed special care. The words poured out of my mouth like poison. "Look at the truth. Your mother can't take care of herself anymore. She's sick. She's becoming a burden to all of us. You should consider putting her in a nursing home before something worse happens." The plate Mrs. Dorothy was holding crashed to the hardwood floor, the pieces scattered across the dining room like fragments of a family that had just broken forever. But what would happen when I discovered the truth about what Mrs. Dorothy had sacrificed for our family? The answer would change everything. The 2 weeks that followed were the coldest of my marriage. Sarah barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was only for strictly necessary things. "Will you be late? We're out of milk," your mother called. Her voice had become mechanical, like a robot programmed to maintain appearances. At the office, where I work as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, I couldn't concentrate. Every time I looked at the numbers on the screen, I saw Mrs. Dorothy's face crumbling when I spoke those cruel words. "Burden," I had said. Those 2 words haunted me like ghosts. My brother-in-law Robert called me Wednesday night. His voice sounded different, more serious. "Michael, we need to talk. Mom hasn't been the same since Sunday." "Robert, No, let me talk. Mom hasn't eaten properly all week. She spends her time staring out the window like she's waiting for something that will never come. Carol says she heard her crying in the early morning." Guilt settled in my stomach like molten lead. I knew I had crossed a line, but my pride prevented me from admitting it openly. "All right, I'll go talk to her on Saturday." "No, Michael, I don't think that's a good idea." "Not yet." He hung up before I could respond. That night, Sarah and I ate dinner in silence. The only noise was cutlery clinking against plates and the distant murmur of the neighbor's television. "Are you going to say anything?" I finally asked. Sarah looked up from her chicken soup, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she looked directly into my eyes. "What do you want me to say, Michael? That what you did was okay? That my mom deserved it?" "I didn't say that. You called her a burden." Her voice cracked slightly. "A burden, Michael. Do you know what that means to a woman who has dedicated her entire life to caring for others?" I stayed quiet because I had no answer. Sarah continued. "My mom raised 3 children alone after Dad left us. She worked 2 shifts at the textile factory so we could go to school. She got up at 4 in the morning to make sandwiches she sold at the farmer's market, just so we'd have money for books. Every word was like a slap. I knew the story, but I had never really connected it with the woman who trembled while serving coffee on Sundays. And now that she's sick, that she needs us, you call her a burden. That night I couldn't sleep, but what I didn't know was that Sarah couldn't either, and for reasons I never could have imagined. Saturday morning, while buying groceries at the local supermarket, I ran into Carol, my youngest sister-in-law. She worked as a nurse at Chicago General Hospital and had always been the most direct of the siblings. "Michael, what a coincidence," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Carol, how's your mom?" Her expression changed immediately. She took my arm and led me to a less crowded corner, between the spice aisles where the aroma of cinnamon and paprika created an aromatic cloud around us. "She's bad, Michael, very bad. And not just because of the diabetes." "What do you mean?" Carol looked around as if making sure no one could hear us. She lowered her voice. "Robert and I have been talking. There are things about Mom that you don't know, things she asked us never to tell Sarah." My heart began beating faster. "What kind of things?" "I can't tell you here, but you need to know the truth before it's too late." She paused, as if debating internally. "Mom isn't just sick with diabetes, Michael. She has something else, something she's been hiding for months." The world stopped around me. The shouts of shoppers, the beeping of cash registers, the noise of carts rolling by. Everything became a distant murmur. "What do you mean by something else?" "Meet me and Robert tomorrow afternoon at Lincoln Park. Sarah can't know, at least not yet. Mom made sacrifices you can't imagine, and she deserves for you to know the truth before judging her." Carol patted my shoulder and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing between the dried herbs and the doubts that began growing in my mind like weeds. That night, during dinner, I observed Sarah with new eyes. There was something in her way of avoiding certain conversations, in how she changed the subject every time her father was mentioned, in the way her eyes moistened when she talked about her childhood. "Sarah, has your mom said anything about her health lately?" "What do you mean?" she asked, but I noticed how her hands tensed around her fork. "I don't know. She's been more fragile, more forgetful. She's aging, Michael. It's normal." But in her voice there was something that told me she was also hiding something. The next day I would discover that family secrets can be heavier than any illness. Lincoln Park was full of families enjoying the sunny Sunday. Children ran between the trees, young couples took selfies by the pond, and elderly people played chess under the shade. It was a perfect postcard of American life, but I felt like an actor out of place in this scene of normalcy. Robert and Carol arrived together, walking slowly, with that solemnity that precedes difficult conversations. Robert, who had always been the family comedian, had an expression I'd never seen on him. "Michael, thanks for coming," Carol said, as we sat on a bench away from the bustle. "What's all this about? You're scaring me." Robert ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "Michael, do you remember when Dad left?" "Sort of. Sarah told me he abandoned them when she was about 8 years old. That's what she believes. But the truth is different." Carol intervened. "Dad didn't leave, Michael. Mum kicked him out." My mind tried to process this information. "Why would she do that?" "Because Dad—" Robert paused for a long time. "Dad had a problem with alcohol and gambling, but that wasn't the worst part." The silence stretched between us. In the distance, a street musician played Amazing Grace on his guitar. Carol took a deep breath. One night, when Sarah was 7 years old, Mum came home early from work and found Dad. She found Dad doing things that a father should never do to his daughter. I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach with a hammer. "What are you saying?" Mom told us years later when we were adults. That night she confronted Dad. There was a terrible fight, and the next day he was gone forever. But not by his own choice. Robert continued. "Mom never pressed charges because she wanted to protect Sarah. She didn't want her to go through the trauma of a trial, of the whole neighborhood finding out, of being labeled forever." The pieces began fitting together in a horrible and perfect way. Sarah's silences, her way of changing the subject when her father was mentioned, certain fears I had never fully understood. Does Sarah know? Not completely. Mom and we decided it was better for her to believe Dad had simply left. Sarah blocked many memories from that time. It's a form of mental protection, Carol added. But Michael, that's not all. Mum sacrificed much more than you can imagine to protect our sister and all of us. And then they told me about Mrs. Dorothy's second sacrifice, one that would forever change my perception of the woman I had called a burden. After Dad left, Carol continued, Mom didn't just have to support the three of us. She also had to pay the debts Dad had left behind. Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Dad owed money to dangerous people, Michael. Loan sharks from the neighborhood, people who don't accept "I can't pay" as an answer. How much did he owe? More than Mum could earn in 5 years working at the factory, Carol replied. But Mum had something valuable, her house. My mind began connecting dots I had never seen. The house where she lives now. That house used to be bigger, Michael. It had 4 bedrooms, a large backyard, even a small garden where Mum grew tomatoes and peppers. It was worth a lot of money because it's in a good neighborhood, Robert continued. Mum sold half the property and used that money to pay Dad's debts. That's why the current house is so small, why it doesn't have a backyard, why Sarah and Carol had to share a bedroom. But that's not all, Carol added, her voice beginning to break. To be able to keep paying the expenses, Mum had to do something else. The wind moved the oak branches above our heads, creating dancing shadows on the ground. I waited. Do you know why Mum never remarried? Robert asked. I thought, well, that she simply didn't find anyone else. Carol shook her head. Mum had opportunities. Mr. Patterson, who owned the hardware store, courted her for years. He was a good man, widowed with money. He would have given the family stability. Then why didn't she? Because Sarah wouldn't accept him, Robert replied. Every time Mr. Patterson came to the house, Sarah would become hysterical. She'd cry, scream, say she didn't want another daddy. And Mom decided that Sarah had suffered enough trauma, Carol completed. So she ended the relationship with Mr. Patterson and never again allowed another man to approach her romantically. I felt a knot in my throat. So Mrs. Dorothy sacrificed the possibility of being happy again to protect Sarah. Exactly. She spent the next 15 years raising us alone, working 2 jobs, rejecting opportunities for love, all so Sarah would feel safe. And now, Carol said with tears in her eyes, when she should finally be able to rest and be cared for by us, you call her a burden. The weight of my words fell on me like a mountain. I had judged a woman without knowing even half of her story. But there was still the biggest secret of all to discover, one that would explain why Mrs. Dorothy had been acting so strange lately. Michael, there's something else you need to know, Carol said, wiping tears with the back of her hand. The reason why Mum has been so forgetful, so fragile. Robert looked at his sister with concern. Carol, are you sure we should? He has to know. He's Sarah's husband. He's part of this family, whether he likes it or not. Carol breathed deeply. 3 months ago, Mum went to the doctor because she was feeling very tired. We thought it was because of the diabetes, but the tests showed something different. My heart accelerated. What kind of tests? Mum has early-stage Alzheimer's, Michael. The words floated in the air like heavy feathers. The park noise completely faded. The doctor says she's still in early stages, but it's going to get worse. That's why she forgets things, why she shakes more, why sometimes she looks lost. And Sarah doesn't know. Robert shook his head. Mom made us promise not to tell her anything until it was absolutely necessary. She says Sarah has already suffered enough because of her. But that's ridiculous, I exploded. Sarah has a right to know. It's her mother. Of course she has a right, Carol replied. But Mom is terrified of becoming a burden to her children, especially after everything she sacrificed for us. The irony was brutal. I had used exactly the word Mrs. Dorothy feared most. How much time does she have? Doctors can't say for certain. It could be 5 years. It could be 10. But every day that passes, a little more of her fades away. Robert stood up and began walking in small circles, another of his nervous habits. "Michael, that's why we needed to tell you. Mum is fighting this alone, trying to stay strong so as not to worry us, but she's crumbling inside. And your words on Sunday were like confirming her worst fears," Carol added, "that she's no longer useful, that she's a hindrance." I covered my face with my hands. Everything made sense now. Why Mrs. Dorothy had spilled the gravy, why her hands shook more, why sometimes she seemed lost in her own thoughts. "What can I do? How can I fix this?" Carol put a hand on my shoulder. "First, you have to talk to Sarah. She notices something's wrong but doesn't know what. She's worried and confused. Do I tell her about the Alzheimer's? Leave that to Mom. But you can start by apologizing and letting her know that you value everything she's done for this family." That afternoon I returned home with a plan, but what I discovered when I arrived made me realize that time was running out faster than I thought. I arrived home around 7 in the evening, my head full of everything Robert and Carol had told me. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, but something in her posture immediately alerted me. Her shoulders were tense, and she moved with that stiffness she showed when she was very worried. "How was your afternoon?" she asked without turning to look at me. "Sarah, we need to talk." "About what?" Her voice sounded tired, as if she already knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation. "About your mum, about what happened on Sunday, about many things." She finally turned toward me. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "Michael, before you say whatever you're going to say, I need to tell you something." She sat at the kitchen table and gestured for me to join her. "Today, I went to see Mom." My stomach contracted. "How is she?" "Bad, Michael, very bad." Her voice broke. "I found her in the kitchen crying, trying to make cookies but not remembering how to mix the dough. Her hands were covered in flour, but she was completely lost." "Sarah—" "No, let me finish." "When she saw me, she started crying harder. She kept apologizing for ruining your shirt, for being so clumsy, for being a burden." The word burden came out of her mouth like a dagger. She hugged me and said, "Honey, your husband is right. I'm no good for anything anymore. You better find a place where they can take care of me without me being in the way." Sarah covered her face with her hands and began to sob. I approached to hug her, but she stopped me. "Do you know what hurts me most, Michael? That a part of me thought maybe you were right." "What do you mean?" "I've been so tired lately. Between work, the house, taking care of Mom on weekends, worrying about her memory lapses. When you said that about the nursing home, a terrible part of me felt relief." She stood up abruptly and began pacing around the kitchen. "And that makes me a horrible daughter. Mom sacrificed everything for us, and I considered for a second the possibility of abandoning her when she needs me most." "Sarah, that doesn't make you horrible. It makes you human." "Really? Then why do I feel like a monster?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Robert. "Michael, you need to come, now. Mom's in the hospital." The world stopped. "What happened?" "She fell in the kitchen. Carol found her unconscious. The doctors say she's stable, but we're on our way." I hung up and looked at Sarah, who had heard enough to understand. "Let's go," I said, taking the car keys. On the way to Chicago General Hospital, neither of us said a word, but I could feel how the weight of my cruel words had become heavier, more real, more damaging. What we would discover at the hospital that night would force us to confront not only Mrs. Dorothy's fragility, but also the secrets that had kept our family together and apart at the same time. The waiting room at Chicago General smelled of disinfectant and cold coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as we waited for news about Mrs. Dorothy. Robert paced back and forth like a caged lion. Carol checked her phone every 2 minutes, and Sarah remained motionless in a blue plastic chair, staring blankly at the linoleum floor. 2 hours had passed since we arrived. The doctors had only told us that Mrs. Dorothy was conscious, but they needed to run more tests. "Does anyone want coffee?" Robert asked for the 3rd time. "No, thanks," we all responded in chorus like an automatic ritual. The silence became heavy again. Finally, Sarah spoke without looking up. Is there something you're not telling me? Carol and Robert exchanged glances. I felt my heart racing. What do you mean? Carol asked, but her voice sounded forced. For the past few weeks, you've been acting strange. Whispered phone calls, conversations that stop when I arrive, knowing looks. She finally looked up and stared at all of us. And you, Michael. Today you came home like you'd seen a ghost. Robert stopped in the middle of his pacing. Sarah. No! She stood up abruptly. I'm tired of being treated like a child. Mom is in the hospital. There's obviously something more than a simple fall, and you keep playing at protecting me. I'm 31 years old. Carol approached her sister. Sarah, sit down, please. Is it cancer? The question came out like a gunshot. Does Mom have cancer and you haven't told me? It's not cancer, I replied before I could stop myself. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes. You know what Mom has? Robert sighed deeply. Sarah, Mom made us promise not to tell you until what? Until it was too late. Carol took her sister's hands. Mom has early-stage Alzheimer's. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah blinked several times, as if trying to process the information. How long have you known? 3 months, Robert replied. 3 months. Her voice rose. And you decided I didn't have the right to know that my mother that she's... She couldn't finish the sentence. She collapsed back into the chair and began crying silently. Sarah, Mom just wanted to protect you, Carol said. She's spent her whole life protecting all of us, especially you. Protect me from what? From reality? From being able to be with her while she still recognizes me? Robert approached. Mom was afraid of becoming a burden. A burden? Sarah shouted, looking directly at me. That damn word again. I felt like I'd been slapped. Sarah, You know what, Michael? Maybe Mom was right to be afraid. Because when she finally needs us, when she finally has to admit she can't do everything alone, her own son-in-law calls her a burden in front of the whole family. Tears were running down my face. Sarah, if you knew everything your mom sacrificed, then tell me everything, enough secrets, enough white lies. And then, in that cold and sad waiting room, between the smell of hospital and the fear of losing Mrs. Dorothy, finally came the moment to tell Sarah the whole truth about her childhood, her father, and the sacrifices her mother had made in silence for decades. Carol sat next to Sarah and took her hands. Robert and I also approached, forming an intimate circle in the middle of the almost empty waiting room. Sarah, what we're going to tell you is going to be very hard to hear, Carol began. But you have a right to know who your mom really is and everything she's done for us. Does this have to do with Dad? Sarah asked with an intuition that surprised me. Robert nodded. Dad didn't leave because he wanted to, Sarah. Mom kicked him out of the house. Why? Carol breathed deeply. Because Dad was hurting you, sister. He was doing things to you that a father should never do to his daughter. I watched Sarah's face slowly transform, as if pieces of a terrible puzzle were beginning to fit together in her mind. I have nightmares sometimes. Confusing nightmares about someone touching me when I don't want them to. I always thought they were just weird dreams. They weren't dreams, Sarah, Robert said softly. Mom found you one night and, well, that same night Dad disappeared forever. Mom never called the police? She didn't want to put you through a trial. She didn't want the whole neighborhood to find out. She protected you the only way she knew how. Carol continued. And then, when Mr. Patterson wanted to marry her, when she had the chance to be happy again, you wouldn't accept him. You'd become hysterical every time he came to the house. I don't remember that clearly. Your mind blocked many memories from that time, Robert explained. It's normal after trauma, but Mom decided your well-being was more important than her happiness. She never got romantically involved with anyone again. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing all the information. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. All this time, my whole life, Mom has been sacrificing herself for me. For all of us, Carol corrected, but especially for you. Even now, with the Alzheimer's diagnosis, her biggest concern isn't her own health. It's not becoming a burden to her children. Sarah looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was pain, understanding, and something that took me a while to recognize: forgiveness. Michael, when you said that about Mom, when you called her a burden, I got so angry with you, but now I realize I'm guilty too. What are you talking about? For years, I've let Mom take care of me, worry about me, protect me. Even as an adult, I'm still her baby who needs protection. I never stopped to think about what she needed. Robert approached. Sarah, you couldn't have known. But I should have noticed. The trembling, the forgetfulness, the way she sometimes stared into space. I attributed it all to age, to diabetes. It never occurred to me that she might be scared, that she might be fighting alone against something as terrible as Alzheimer's. At that moment, Dr. Martinez appeared, an older man in a white coat with a serious expression. Mrs. Dorothy's family? We all stood up immediately. How is she? Carol asked. Stable. The fall was a consequence of a temporary disorientation episode, probably related to her neurological condition. He looked at all of us. Are you all aware of the diagnosis? Sarah stepped forward. Doctor, I just found out. How serious is it? Your mother is in the early stages, but progression can be unpredictable. What concerns me most right now isn't so much the physical condition, but her emotional state. She's mentioned several times that she feels like a burden to her family. I felt like I'd been stabbed. Can we see her? Sarah asked. Yes, but one at a time. She's a bit confused, and too many visitors at once could agitate her more. Sarah looked directly into my eyes. Michael, you go first. It's time you fixed this. I walked down the hospital corridor with trembling legs. Room 314 was at the end of the hallway, and every step I took felt like walking toward a final judgment. I knocked softly on the door before entering. Mrs. Dorothy was lying in the hospital bed, connected to an IV, but awake. When she saw me, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and fear. Michael, I didn't expect to see you here. Mrs. Dorothy, I need to talk to you. I pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. I need to ask for your forgiveness. She tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. You don't have anything to apologize for, son. You're right. I'm already a burden to everyone. No, I interrupted with more force than I intended. Ma'am, that's exactly what I came to tell you. You are not a burden. You have never been a burden. And the words I said on Sunday were the cruelest and most unfair I've ever spoken in my life. Mrs. Dorothy looked at me with confusion. But Michael, Mrs. Dorothy, today I learned the truth. Robert and Carol told me about your father, about Mr. Patterson, about everything you sacrificed to protect Sarah and your children. I saw her eyes moisten. They shouldn't have told you that. Yes, they should have, because I judged a woman without knowing her story. I called the person who made the most sacrifices in this family a burden. I moved closer and took her trembling hand. Mrs. Dorothy, you are not a burden. You are the pillar that kept this family standing when everything was falling apart. Tears began rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. But Michael, I can't do things like before. I forget things, I shake, I spill gravy. And that doesn't make you any less valuable. You spent decades caring for others, working 2 jobs, giving up your own happiness for your children's well-being. Now it's our turn to care for you. I don't want to be a bother. Mrs. Dorothy, look at me. I waited until she looked directly at me. You will never be a bother. You're going to be a mother being loved by her children, a grandmother being respected by her grandchildren, a woman being honored for everything she's given. She was quiet for a moment, processing my words. Michael, I'm scared. I'm scared of forgetting my children's faces, of not recognizing Sarah, of becoming someone I'm not. It's normal to be scared, Ma'am, but you won't go through this alone. Sarah already knows everything, and we're here to accompany you every step of the way. Sarah already knows about everything? Yes, ma'am, and she's outside waiting to hug you and tell you how much she loves you. Mrs. Dorothy closed her eyes and sighed deeply. Michael, can you promise me something? Anything, ma'am. Promise me you'll take care of Sarah when I can't anymore. Promise me you'll protect her like I tried to do. I promise, Mrs. Dorothy, but I also want you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll let us take care of you. Promise me you'll accept our love without feeling guilty. Promise me you'll believe you deserve all the affection we're going to give you. For the first time since I entered the room, Mrs. Dorothy smiled genuinely. I promise, son. I leaned over and hugged her gently. In that embrace, I felt decades of sacrifice, unconditional love, and a strength I had never known how to recognize. Do you want to see Sarah now? Yes, please. I left the room and found Sarah waiting in the hallway. Her eyes were red but determined. How is she? She's waiting for you. And Sarah, she knows you love her. She's always known. Sarah entered the room, and through the window I could see how mother and daughter embraced, cried together, and began healing decades of secrets and misunderstandings. Robert and Carol approached me. How do you feel? Carol asked. Like I've woken up from a nightmare and can finally see clearly. I looked at both of them. Thank you for telling me the truth. Thank you for helping me understand who your mom really is. We all make mistakes, Michael, Robert said. What's important is that now you know the truth and can act accordingly. That night, as we watched Sarah hold her mother's hand in the hospital, I understood something fundamental. Families aren't built just with blood, but with sacrifice, forgiveness, and the willingness to protect each other in the most difficult moments. Mrs. Dorothy had demonstrated that truth for decades. Now it was our turn to demonstrate it to her. This story teaches us that we never really know what someone has been through until we know their whole story. Sometimes, the people who have given the most love are the ones who are most afraid of becoming a burden. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember the value of family and forgiveness. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week I share stories that help us reflect on what truly matters in life.